Hello everyone, my name is Fox. This is Forza Horizon 5 running on the Steam Deck. Specifically, it's the benchmark mode running on the Steam Deck, which is kind of apt because this is the type of stuff that we're going to be showing in this preview video. Before we get too far, I want to show you one image. This is when I first got my Steam Deck, I loaded up these particular instances. On the left-hand side, you can see GPD's WinMax 2021 edition. This is running the AMD 4800U build. On the top left, you can see it's running 41 FPS, and this is right where control starts. Like, this is the moment the game becomes controllable. And on the right, you can see 71 FPS on the Steam Deck. Now, if we roll back here real quick, this is a 1.73x performance improvement, which is great because what I said many, many months ago was within the same TDP, 1.7 times performant within the same TDP. Now, so I was pleased that within the limited amount of games that Valve said I can show you guys, that I was able to show that this was the case. I do want to say that this is not going to always be the case, and there'll be fluctuations in the game as you're going along. This is largely anything that is GPU bound that you're going to be seeing this large difference, because the GPU on the Steam Deck is just generationally better than every other handheld there. Now, the other thing is that on the Win series, you can actually TDP up and close this gap a lot. So there's going to be less of a performance difference there as long as you push TDP. We'll get into that in a moment. This kind of divided into a few different pieces here. The important thing here is if we go back to this picture, I want to show you that the GPD WinMax is running at nearly 26 watt total system power, and on the Steam Deck it's 26.6 watt. So largely, they're approximately the same pull from the battery, but there's just a gigantic increase in performance. Now, this isn't the case all the time. Specifically, in my synthetic benchmarks, I am doing the GPD Win 3 and the AYANEO Retro, or the GPD Win Max, both the 4800U version and the 1165. And then for the game demo side of stuff, when I'm doing comparisons, in the few that I am doing comparisons, if I'm not holding it like a crazy madman, is the GPD Win 3 and then the AYANEO Next, which is using the 5800U, so it has the Zen 3 CPU cores, which actually help it in a few different instances. So we'll be able to take a look at that and take a look at the performance differences on all the different ones, and I try to gear it so that power is relatively the same. The other thing I wanted to address is I've seen some comments saying that from my video, people got the feeling that you're going to have to tweak all over the place to actually get anything out of the Steam Deck. That's not the case. Literally, in this picture, what I did was nothing. I pressed play, and that was it. This was the result. So they're both running the same settings. It's just that there was this performance difference. Now, that performance difference has closed with later updates that have come, so Proton updates or whatever, that has changed the performance on the Steam Deck. It's actually gotten a little bit lower. But something I want to tell you about, because I actually just recently reran all these different tests. So numbers change, but I have the most accurate up-to-date. This is the 6th, February 6th, right? Yeah, it's February 6th. So the latest update that I got, February 6th, literally reran a bunch of tests today, so I can get you that data. So don't worry about TDP so much. Yes, I've been able to improve performance, and I'm going to go over all the different types of controls that I have and show you in real time that stuff happening. So we'll go to that in just a moment. Before we do that, I do want to have a few people to thank. Number one, thank you to Cypher for all your scripts and stuff. They were super helpful. Number two, thank you to Algo. He has an MX450 Nvidia laptop with an 1135 G7. That he gave me some. I gave him 3 benchmarks, the synthetic benchmarks that I was allowed to run on the Steam Deck as well. So we have comparisons where he actually TDP down to get total power to be around 25, 26 watt, so that we can kind of measure them apples to apples, Steam Deck against an MX450. So I have synthetic benchmarks of that, so you can kind of get an idea, ballpark understanding of how the Steam Deck at its max TDP compares to an MX450 if we were to kind of arrange power. Obviously, the MX450, if you boost power even further, it'll go further. But if we put them at the same power, you can get a clear understanding of where the Steam Deck sits. So that's that. So thank you for that. Before we get too far, the TDP setting on the Steam Deck is how my old settings have always been advertised. That means that PL1 and PL2 are locked, so the slow and fast on AMD side are locked. They have the same number. The reason why this is good is because you don't want fluctuations. You don't want 28 seconds of fast performance, because it's not very helpful. So these are like old things that I've always advocated, and that is by default how the Steam Deck runs. It just runs at 15 watt, 15 watt. So without further ado, let's go and show you all the different types of controls that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this over real quick. Okay, so I knocked off a single core, so 1 core, 2 threads is gone. Now we have 3 core, 6 threads. Now you can see that this is still running at basically 2 gigahertz, but if we go ahead and knock it down a further core, we do 2 core, 4 thread, you can see that it's going to start changing how much frequency it's pushing into those cores. And if you took a look at the frame rate, you see that we got a boost in frame rate. So why does that happen? So this technique isn't new or anything. This has been known from in gaming circles for a while. Like, you don't need a whole bunch of cores. Like, having more cores never mattered. It was always speed, higher frequency. So what happens here is, in a constrained power envelope, right, we have 15 watts to play with. When we do that, when we start parking cores, it says, oh, I have more power that I can start pushing to those other cores, and it starts bumping up frequency. Because the game doesn't really need 4 cores and 2 cores is okay for this particular game, what happens is that that extra frequency is actually boosting performance for us. So we went from 60 FPS to about 71 FPS. So we got like a 20% performance boost just by, cutting off 2 cores. Well, parking 2 cores. Let me go ahead and jump right back. All right, so now we're back in here. Now, what happens if I do 1 core, right? You say, well, that's pretty awesome. What happens if we go to 1 core? Now, if we go to 1 core, 2 threads, you can see we jump up to 3.5 gigahertz. But even though that we went to 3.5 gigahertz, performance-wise, frame rate-wise, we actually take a pretty big hit. So you can see right now we're at like 54, 53 FPS. So not really the best case. Also, let me go ahead and pull the plug on this so you can see battery metrics while we're doing this. Let me go ahead and go back to all core here. All right, so all 4 core 8 thread are back now. So we have that. So now there are some ways, by default, the governor, the scheduler that is running is ScheduTill. There are a few different ones that we have there. We have the kind of the standard ones like performance, on demand, power save, all those types of different ones. And I played around with them, but ultimately I just left the main schedule, the general default schedule, which is ScheduTill. I tried kind of putting guardrails on the CPU clock within the governor, but because P states on the CPU clocks kind of will disregard what the governor is saying it. So if I say, hey, go down to this smaller frequency, the power state will say, well, no, this is my base and I won't go lower than that. In a few instances, we actually want to do that, and I'll show that later on. But I'll show how that is improved if we're in like constrained TDP. But let's take a look how it looks when I change it directly. All right, so in this particular situation, we can see that we're still running 4 core 8 thread here. I'm going to go ahead and just do 1 core 2 thread. So here we are, and you can see that it went to 3.5 gigahertz just because we have that power budget. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell the CPU to do 1.4 gigahertz on the CPU. You can see right there that it went to 1.4 gigahertz. Now, going back to what I said previously, right? Like, we can try to put in guardrails on the CPU from the scheduler itself. Say, ScheduTill, you have a min clock of this and a max clock of that. Even if you do that, and the scheduler tries to abide by those rules, if the power state of the chip overrides and says, no, my base clock is 1.4 gigahertz, you're not going below that. So this is why it's better to kind of override the CPU directly. So let's go back to that real quick. So now I'm at 1.4 gigahertz. I'm going to go ahead and say, no, CPU, you're actually going to go to 700 megahertz. So you can see real quick right there that, like, it's pretty easy. I'm going to boost that back up. Go to all core. All right, so now we're back to default settings at the moment. Now, the one thing that I want to make clear here is that none of this is necessary. You don't have to do any of this stuff. In fact, I am just showing you all the different controls that I had and tried applying to a bunch of different stuff. I have shown some performance improvements in stuff, and I'll get to that in a moment. But, I mean, I just showed you 20% performance improvement on control right there with going to dual core. But I'm going to be able to show you in other benchmarks that I have in here. The most important thing here is that it's really not necessary. It really isn't necessary. In fact, using GameScope alone is like 95% of the stuff, and goes back to what I was saying about how GameScope is the secret sauce for the Steam Deck. So again, none of this stuff is necessary. It's just cool. Okay, so you can totally skip this part. Go to the description field below and take a look at like benchmarks and other stuff if none of this is interesting to you. All right, so now another thing that you can do is actually just kind of modify the GPU itself. So if we go and we say do 500 megahertz on the GPU, okay, now it's running at 500 megahertz, and you can see that our frame rate just took a huge nosedive. The important bit here is that you can take a look at the power itself. So if we take a look at the power right there, you can see it really start diving down because we're using sensationally less power. You can see that the amount of power taken is starting to really take a nosedive because we cut power to the GPU. The CPU is going to respond to that because it doesn't need to run as fast as it does as well. So capping the GPU, the CPU will respond automatically, and the amount of total system power is going to just go down a bunch. Now, just so it's clear, I kind of really recommend that we use automatic on GPU. I've never, out of all the stuff that I've tested, trying to mess around with the GPU clocks, even though that will be available to you, hasn't been worthwhile. I never found that to be very worthwhile. I found modifying CPU clocks to be the most worthwhile, just because its default power states can kind of just spin its wheels a little bit too much, kind of waste power when it doesn't need to. So by modifying CPU a little, or just parking CPU cores, is where you're going to really start maximizing that performance improvement. Now, doing that across all games isn't wise. Every game is going to need different settings, so it's just kind of just being mindful that the CPU side is the weakest side of the Steam Deck. The GPU is just like alarmingly good everywhere. Like everywhere. It's kind of crazy. So I have control of GPU clocks. I have control of CPU clocks. I have control of the scheduler. Modifying the scheduler really doesn't help all that much. It kind of does when we take a look at microSD and SSD load times. I'll get into that later. And I showed you core parking. The only thing that I didn't show you right now is obviously changing TDP. So let's go ahead and show you that as well. All right, so here we are running at 15 watt. Let me just double check that and go to, yeah, so we're capped at 15 watt. Now I'm going to go ahead and do 5 watt. And you're going to see performance tank. At this point, you can see that we're running at basically 30 FPS in this particular segment. We went from 15 watt TDP all the way down to 5 watt TDP. TDP adjustment is kind of valuable, especially when it ties in with GameScope. Those are the two main settings I think that a lot of people are going to mess around with. They should be very easy to manipulate and very easy to iterate through to kind of like hone in on what's a good stable setting. Okay, so that segment's largely over. That was the what type of control I have over the Steam Deck. It's largely everything. I have like complete control. The only thing I can't do is undervolt it. If we could undervolt this machine, we would be able to really start seeing like ridiculous performance at very low TDPs. We'll just start really blowing it out of the park, especially compared to the GP2 Win3 or the AYANEO, whichever one. Doesn't matter. If we could undervolt, we would just destroy when we already kind of destroy at the low TDP. So let's go ahead and go on to the next segment. But before we do, I just want to kind of talk about a few things. So the GP2 Win3 is running Windows 11 21H2. It is running the latest 1191 Intel driver, so that's across the board. Everything you see benchmark-wise or even game demo comparison-wise is going to be using that feature set. If I was on the Retro Power or the AYANEO Next, both of these are also running 21H2 but Windows 10, and it's running the 22.2.1 AMD drivers. All right, so that's pretty much it. We're going to take a look at synthetic benchmarks first. Up first is Heaven, which is my favorite. Now, the only difference here is that when I normally run Heaven, you always see me running at low settings. And the reason for that is because I started with the GP2 Win 1 and the GP2 Win 2, which didn't really have much of a GPU to speak of. And it's kind of been rolling along so we can get a kind of a better comparison of what was going on. If I were to run low settings on these particular synthetic benchmarks, the Steam Deck would get steamrolled because I'd be comparing Zen 2 versus Zen 3 or Willow Cove, which are both better CPUs than what's on the Steam Deck. It wouldn't be very helpful for you guys to kind of understand what's going on. So instead, I'm changing low settings to high settings. I'm making it more GPU bound so we can see the difference in how much performance we get even at low TDPs. All the synthetic benchmarks I do every watt, so 5 to 15 watt, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, onward and so forth. That's just so you can see. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the benchmarks. All right, so the first chart up is Heaven with the settings of Ultra and Extreme at 800p. The only difference here is that the Win 3's screen resolution is at 720p, so it is actually running at 720p on the Win 3. That's the only clarification I want to make here, just so you kind of have a better understanding of what's going on. Anyway, let's jump back into it. So if we take a high-level look at this graph, we can see that from 5 watt to 10 watt, the Steam Deck is largely in the same low FPS, and then 11 watt, it just kind of jumps up like nuts. I want to make it clear here that I reran 9, 10, 11 watt benches multiple times. 10 watt was always pretty much the same. 9 watt, actually, my minimum FPS jumped up to about 25. Periodically, like 1 out of like 5 times it would happen. I recorded the low result here because it happened most often. So there's just something interesting that's happening here, but this is the results that I got after multiple passes on those particular wattages. So that's just so that you can kind of clearly understand what was going on there. The one thing that I want to address here is that 11 watt, especially when we start taking a look at them a lot through all the different synthetic benchmarks, 11 watt really is where the best efficiency is for this particular chip. So when we take a look at 11 watt, you can see it starts to break away from the other two platforms, and it just kind of leads by and large. If we go to the next chart, we're going to be taking a look at average FPS. Now, because average FPS and average FPS is taking from the low and the highs, it kind of looks a little bit more even here across all the TDPs, but you can clearly see that throughout every TDP stepping that it just kind of dominates from 5 watt to 10 watt. And then as we get closer to 15 watt, it's not as big of a difference. If we take a look in this particular instance, if we try to compare them 15 watt to 15 watt, we're only showing about a 30 to 35% performance improvement. If we go to the next chart here, this is a glance at the high FPS. Now, what's worthwhile to point out here, we can see that, again, low TDP is just dominating. But if we go to the high end, we can see that Intel G starts to actually compensate here. So the one thing I want to kind of point out here is that Intel, the 1165 G7, actually does have a higher FPS than the SteamDeck at 13 to 15 watt. And naturally, because the GPU Win 3 can scale past 15 watt, it can go up to 30 watt, we can actually start showing some pretty decent numbers. Now, of course, there's going to be diminishing returns, but we can still go further yet on the GPU Win 3. But this is just for the highs, not the averages or the lows. Especially on lower TDP, we actually super dominate. So that was a quick look at Heaven. The thing that I want to make note of here is that feel free to pause and just kind of look at the graph and kind of digest what it's going through. I'm going to be kind of going through them pretty fast. I don't want to take too much time and explaining too much, going watt by watt on each one of them. It just takes too much time, so feel free to pause on any of the particular graphs and then take a look at them at your own leisure. All right, so next up we have Valley. This is also the lows. Now, this one doesn't have the same dynamics that the Heaven benchmark showed. We see a more clear progression through lows to the high TDP, especially on the SteamDeck. It does have diminishing returns. Again, at 11 watt, you see 12 watt. These two TDPs, they really there's not much performance gain afterwards. So 11 to 12 watt, we're going to start showing diminishing returns on the SteamDeck. This is kind of true over and over again, no matter what you're doing. 11 to 12 watt really is kind of where it's super efficient on the SteamDeck. Anything higher, you will get better performance, but you're going to start spending like 30 to 40% more power to get 8 to 10% more performance. And this kind of happens a lot. Here we can take a look at the average FPS. Clearly, we're just like stupid dominate. Now, one thing to point out here is that these are all stock settings on SteamDeck as well as on the Win 3 and the 4800U. I am not interfering with trying to increase their performance by either stepping in and changing GPU clocks or on Intel side changing EPP modes. I'm not doing that. I could increase performance better, but this is just looking at it from a stock perspective. Once again, if we take a look at 15 watt, we're looking at a 30 to 35% performance improvement on the SteamDeck over the other models. If we take a look at highs as well, again, we can see that Intel Z is very, very competitive with getting high FPS. It actually does a really good job here, but its lows are what kills it the most. Okay, next up is Superposition. All of these are Unigine benchmarks because they are cross-platform and they work well. I like them, and I've used Heaven a lot. So the only difference here is that I would like to revisit this when I am able to get Windows installed on the SteamDeck and kind of run these in DirectX. So I will be revisiting these as soon as I have the ability to do that. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at Superposition. This is running at the 1080p medium setting. If we take a look at low FPS, we can see that SteamDeck is just absolutely crushing it across the board. If you take a look at the average FPS, once again, we have, a monumental lead. Okay, once again, if we take a look at the 15 watt result, we can see that it's basically a 55 to 40% performance improvement compared to the other two platforms. And we're going to take a look at the high FPS difference, and once again, this is large. The interesting thing here to note is that Superposition being a newer type of benchmark, we're seeing much better improvements on the SteamDeck compared to the other platforms when older benchmarks like Heaven and Valley have a smaller performance difference. So it's a little bit of an interesting note to make of here. So just interesting data. Finishing out the synthetic benchmarks, we're going to be taking a look at the SteamDeck versus an MX450 based laptop. Once again, the MX450 based laptop has had its TDP lowered so that its total system power matches what the SteamDeck uses at 15 watt. So effectively, both of these are using around 26 watts of total system power. That is 26 watts being pulled from the battery on both platforms so that it's more of an even footing in terms of a competition. So first up, we're going to be taking a look at Heaven. The big thing here is that the low FPS on the SteamDeck is just way outcompeting the low FPS on the MX450. And, you know, we are choking the system. Obviously, AMX 450 part can TDP up and really start to beat it in performance, but the Steam Deck is really showing that it's more well-rounded in this particular benchmark. If we go over to Valley, we can see that the MX450 is actually trading blows really well with the Steam Deck, and both these are kind of on an even footing. They're kind of trading blows here and there, but I would almost say that they're relatively even in this particular instance, which is pretty cool to see. Then if we go over to Superposition, once again, the Steam Deck is the more well-rounded system out of these particular benches. And that's not to say that the MX450 isn't a well-balanced machine. It just clearly needs more power. So when we constrain its TDP like this, it's clearly showing that it's caged. And if we were just to put more power into that MX450, just rise like a champion. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to segue into the next part, which is game demo and comparisons, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Before that, I'm going to touch base on the part that I teased earlier. Now, I did show you getting better performance on control when we parked some CPU cores. I've also been able to get better performance with leaving all cores active, but just tuning CPU frequency, putting a low ceiling on the CPU frequency. So if we take a look at this, this is heaven. This is running at 5 watt. All of these settings are 5 watt. The only thing that's different here is that I'm running at different CPU frequencies for each different test. So we can see 5 watt stock is by and large getting the worst results out of the bunch. And as we go up, basically 1.2 gigahertz on the CPU is really where the money spot is for 5 watt TDP. If we take a look at the chart, we can see that it looks like it's kind of going down on the highs, like it's going up and then down if we take a look at the high FPS, but if we take a look at the averages, it really kind of ends, it starts to go down after 1.2 gigahertz. So 1.2 gigahertz as a ceiling on CPU all core at 5 watt really is a nice sweet spot. There is some variability there. This is what it looks like in Forza. All right, so this is a super messy graph, but I've combined all of them, and you can kind of see that this is running the Forza 5 benchmark, and I've just lined them up so that they're all going at the same exact time. If you take a look at them, you can see that there is some synchronicity to them, especially right in the beginning where the kind of the FPS peaks and then goes straight down when the game actually loads out of just starting up the benchmark. So if we take a look at this, this is all lined up. The important part here is that the blue line is actually the stock setting actually goes below 20 FPS 1, 2, 3, 4 times versus 1.1 gigahertz, which goes below 20 FPS 2 times, and 1.2 gigahertz, which goes below the 20 FPS line exactly 1 time and right in the beginning. After that, it doesn't go below 20. In fact, if we were just to count how many frames are 30 and above, a stock setting, out of all the frames captured in the benchmark, 2,426 frames are above 30. If we do 1.2 gigahertz, 2,519 frames are above 30. If we just take those numbers, it's 10% better. We are doing 10% better at hitting 30 and above when we do stock compared to 1.2 gigahertz. And again, this is pretty much similar to the Heaven benchmark, where stock versus 1.2 is about 10% better. So across synthetic benchmarks and actually a game demo, we're getting 10% better just by tuning the CPU here. Again, you don't really have to do these things. You don't. These are just interesting data bits. What is very, very beneficial a lot of the time is just using GameScope. Cap frame rate, and that's it. You're pretty much done. You can also probably tweak TDP, which will also be available to you, and kind of fine-tune, just kind of narrowing down where you're trying to find it. But that's it. It's really that simple. This is really just data, okay? Okay, so this next part, we're going to be taking a look at the game demos and comparing it to some of the other handhelds here, and then also just some game demos themselves just running by themselves, and then we're going to start getting to the other comparisons.
Did I lose you there for a moment? You know what's on my mind. My baby brother, Dylan. 17 years since the men of this bureau took him. murder weapon? Really? The same gun. The same gun. Okay. Now I have a gun. Okay. Now I have a gun. Right after the pyramid spoke to me, and it was just noise, and I understood every word. And this gun's alive. You know what? I'm happy. Happy to be here. Things have quieted down outside. Is it safe to go?
Got some cleaning up to do.
Yeah, he's a real pro at smacking demons around. That's why I built him that well-functioning arm. To kick demon ass. Hey, Psycho! Hey, Psycho! Watch the merchandise!
Hey, stop bitching and take cover. Sorry, Nico. Oh. What a mess. What a mess. I did it! Round 2. Fight! Not bad! You win! Hey amigo, this is a fast travel door. Smash them to get a discount on fast travel. Smash them all, and Horizon will cover all your expenses. Vale.
All right, so now we're taking a look at SSD versus microSD load time comparisons. Now, the one thing that to note here is there was a thing that I had noticed that on some of my microSD card load time comparisons that the microSD was loading the general game faster, which was interesting. And the only thing that I noticed is that I had it plugged in. Now, it could be that there were some background processes running, or having it plugged in made the scheduler, ScheduTill, which is the default, say, hey, I'm plugged in, I can boost CPU here. And just having faster CPU was accelerating load times, versus the other one, which was SSD, and having nothing there was kind of slower. So the thing that I tried to do is replicate it as best I could, and here it is. So all of these are SSD. Bottom left is plugged in, bottom right is a schedule set to performance, top right is the default ScheduTill. You can clearly see that there's like a 1 to 2 second delay. Same loading time. Now, again, I'm showing you this here because I can't show you any of the SteamOS stuff. I can only show you games and talking about the performance and stuff, and I can show you the hardware. I can actually show you anything else running on this type of stuff, so that's the reason why. So here we are taking a look at Dead Cells loading. Now, once again, load times between SSD and microSD are largely the same. You can see right here that it was a little bit faster on SSD, 2 seconds slower on microSD, and this is actually loading into the game. This is just the beginning segment of the game. And here we can see that, once again, it's 2 seconds slower. Nothing crazy really to write home about. This is Portal 2 loading, and again, I can't show you any of the SteamOS stuff, so this is it loading, and you saw that the time starting is like at 7 seconds, because during 0 to 7 seconds was stuff I can't show you. Even though you saw those two things load out of order, when you saw the checkerboard stuff happen, they actually happened at the same time, which was pretty interesting. This is the loading time. Now, this is one area where it actually is faster on SSD by a good margin. Nothing really crazy. I mean, basically, if you bought the $400 model and you're only going to be running off of the microSD all the time, I think it's fine. Like, you can see it here.
Good morning. You have been in suspension for 50 days. In compliance with state and federal regulations, all testing candidates in the Aperture Science Extended Relaxation Center must be...
So about 13 seconds. SSD is 13 seconds faster in this particular instance. This is loading time for Street Fighter V. So about 1 second faster on SSD.
Beyond the battle.
And then when it's actually loading the game itself, they're actually exactly identical. There is no difference whatsoever. Now that little segment was out of order, but I mean, they're pretty much exactly like a half a second difference. SSD is faster. Nothing really to go crazy about. This is Devil May Cry 5. Wow, that one actually, the microSD actually won there by like, a half a second. This could just be variance, right? Like, it's so little that they're probably just exactly the same.
You're alive. Can you hear me? They are already looking for you.
Largely, the worst case scenario that I found was like 17 seconds. So 17 to 12 seconds. I don't know. It's not really anything crazy. Basically, what it comes down to is if you bought the $400 model, you'll be fine. You're not gonna care. It's not gonna be like outrageously slow that you're gonna notice. Don't feel like the $400 models is just a solid purchase. All right, up next is input latency, total input latency. Now, again, in my preview video, I told you I had a 480 FPS camera. I validated it in that preview video, so you can actually take a look at it there. We're going to first be taking a look at Dead Cells, and as you see this frame count go through it, it's important to take a look at the frame rate that's going here. Right now, this is without VSync, so the game is running as fast as it possibly can. This is the best case scenario of how fast Dead Cells can receive input and update on the screen. And if we take a look at it, it's 16 frames. Now, 480 FPS is I'm recording it every 2.08 milliseconds. So if we do 16 times 2.08, we have 33.33. That's 33.33 milliseconds for my button press and an update to happen on the screen. That's 2 frames of a 60 hertz screen. That's insane. Now, I've recorded this on my iPhone Pro 13 Max as well, and I've got it down to 1 frame. Of course, the 240 FPS footage on here doesn't actually record at 240 FPS when I validate it. It's more like 173. So there could be some extra variance in there. So I didn't want to use the iPhone 13 Pro Max on there because 1 frame is absolutely insane. But 2 frames, I feel, is like something that's going to be happening largely if we take VSync off on dead cells. So 2 frames before an update it's 33 milliseconds for total input latency. Press a button, update on the screen. That's insane. That's really good. I don't have footage here, but when you put VSync on dead cells, it goes up to 25 milliseconds. So it's actually 53 milliseconds of total input latency, which again is, even with VSync on, that is still fantastic. That is really, really good total input latency on a 60 hertz display. It's fantastic. Next up, if we take a look at control, now the thing that I did with control, because the pipeline on these 3D games could be a lot longer, there could be some extra delay with input latency. Now the thing here is, like, if some of the animations, you don't actually see anything happen very rapidly. So instead I just used the gun and I counted when the bullet showed up on the screen, and I just got a very high contrast area. And when I took a look at that, is basically 40, 45, 46 frame counts before I saw the bullet animation appear. So you can see that the bullet animation is right there at a frame count of 48. So more or less this is 96 milliseconds of total input latency, which is, console-like. This could just be the condition of control and whatever pipeline it has. Obviously, we already saw how well Dead Cells runs. So we know that it is capable of ludicrously fast total input latency. So I am going to chalk this up that this is just what happens within control and in the pipeline of control. So we're looking at like 96, 98 milliseconds of total input latency on control. Next up, I'm going to take a look at Ghostrunner running at 2 different frame rates. I have it running at 60 FPS, and I also put out a frame limiter at 30 FPS to see what would happen. In my head, I thought putting in a frame cap of 30 would be a problem, but it actually turned out to roughly being the same. Like, determining when I actually press the button, I would say that there's enough variance in there that they're actually pretty much identical. So regardless if it's capped at 30 or it's at 60, it's basically like 100, 110 milliseconds of total input latency. And the game runs very, very fast. So being able to play it is completely easy. It's just that this is what the total input latency is and what I recorded. One thing that I would really like here is if we could get VSync off-like performance with VSync on. That would be pretty awesome. Okay, this is a pretty critical part. So battery life. I've done 3 weeks, okay? I've run so many battery life tests. I can't begin to tell you how many time lapses I've done. Every update that came to the Steam Deck, I ran it again, and I ran it again, and I ran it again, and I just kept on running it. This is what's nice to have 2 units is that on one unit I could just constantly do something while I'm doing something else, and I just kept on running it and running it and running it. And for the life of me, I just wasn't getting anything that Valve set up to 8 hours. I never managed to get to 8 hours. So let's go from the worst case scenario first, okay? Worst case scenario when I first got the unit in. And again, take a look at this video here, please. This is the battery life video I did for the Steam Deck a long time ago. It still holds true today with a lot of the fundamentals, right? The battery is the core, it's the foundation of every handheld. If you just have this amazing gaming laptop that takes 200 watts and you get 10 minutes of battery life, it's maybe glorious 10 minutes, but it's fundamentally worthless. You wouldn't use it. You wouldn't take it out because 10 minutes is nothing. The battery is the foundation of these devices, and having a 40 watt hour battery on the Steam Deck is what is our ultimate limit here. Typically, when you say 15 watt TDP and it uses all 15 watt, the rest of system power, LCD, Wi-Fi, and all the other stuff could use up to 7 watts. So typically when you say 22 watts is what you're going to be using, that's how I got the 110 minute mark. However, when I got in my preview unit, when I started looking at it, trying to arrange worst case scenario, turn VSync off, have it run terrible, like put it at low settings, get high frame rate, and just burn the chip, right? Like make it go as fast as it can. I was able to make the system use up to 27.4 watts, even though the TDP is capped at 15 watts. Now, I don't know if I can show this to you or not. Maybe when it gets to the 24th, you can look at this data through the command line. Even though you see the cap at 15 watt, you can clearly see that the chip itself is ballooning up to 20 watt. So it's consistently using 20 watt, even though it's at a 15 watt cap. And then the 7 watt total rest of system power applies on top of that. So I was getting like 27.4 total system power as watt pull from the battery. What that means is it was like basically like 85 minutes of battery life. And I did a time lapse of that. And then I ran both of my units at it, and I got like 85 minutes and 90 minutes. So effectively, it's like 90 minutes of battery life when you're running this. And this happened on both of my preview units. Now, this is just data that's in the preview units. Maybe this changes when you guys get your units. I would love to have someone tell me that they're getting good stuff. But on both of my preview units, this is the time that I got on both of them as a worst case scenario, trying to make it as bad as possible, right? If you turn VSync off, if you have low settings and you're running 90 FPS when there's no reason to, you have a 60 hertz display. Why in the world would you run at 90 FPS? There's no real reason for it. Just put VSync on. You'll save power. There's no reason. You can inadvertently have terrible battery life. So make sure that you're trying to, take a look at it periodically. Now, this is my preview unit. This might change. As a best case scenario, what I've been able to accomplish, if like for Dead Cells, for instance, if I were to put brightness at 50% and volume at 50%, leave Wi-Fi on, but just have it running there, I was able to get basically 6 hours and 5 minutes. Total system power was 6.5 watts. This was better than I thought it would get. I did say that this is the tail end. If you go to my battery video at the end of it, I do say that I could see 6 hours as like a tops, and that's basically where we are. Like more or less, my battery video is like on the money for me based on what I'm able to accomplish here. This is the best that I can do at all. Like I can do Portal 2. Portal 2 uses about 7 watts, so I can get like 5 hours and 40 minutes on Portal 2 if I cap to 30 FPS. But Valve is telling me that internally they get better. I've just not been able to reproduce it, so I'm telling you those numbers here. So basically, that's the span of battery life. Typically, especially in this video, I'm going to show you that it's pretty easy to get like 4 hours. Like I can get 4 hours out of Forza 5 if we just cap to 30 and we just tweak a few things. Even if you don't, you can get to like 3 hours and 40 minutes on Forza 5 easy. Literally just set it to lowest settings, do GameScope 30, and you're done. You can get 3 hours and 40 minutes on Forza 5. So 4 hours, I think, is like a normal average for the Steam Deck, even on very performing games. You just have to cap the frame rate down to 30. If you try to hit 60 all the time, you're going to start using more power because that CPU is going to really start ramping up power use to accommodate that frame rate. Okay, so bottom line, my grade for the battery on the Steam Deck when you frame it against the chip is it can be a B plus, generally speaking. Like you're going to get 3 to 4 hours most often, regardless of whatever game you're going to be looking at, provided that you do at 30 frames a second on more modern, newer games. If you try to hit 60 on modern, newer games, battery life is going to be closer to 2 hours. That's pretty much it. Worst case battery life is bad. Best case battery life, 6 hours is really good. Really, really good. That's like an A, not an A plus, A. There's things that go to 8 hours and then 12 hours. Those are like S-class 12 hours. A plus is like 8 hours. 8 hours like a full day, right? That's A plus. So that's my grading for the battery. All right, so this wasn't supposed to be in this video, but I figured it's not really. It's a small amount of data, so I can just kind of fit in here. It's thermals. So again, because I can run the system at 20 watt, like the chip is going to be using 20 watt and the rest of the system is going to be using 7 watt, 27 watt total. So we're kind of pushing it past to what it really should be using. Even when we do that and I run it for 40 minutes, basically it averages around 76 degrees Celsius. It doesn't go above 80 at all. And then when we take a look at the thermal, like visually thermals, all of the heat is pretty much localized in the center where you hold it on the grips. Like over here, it is icy cool. Like you don't feel the thermal radiation doesn't transfer out to that. So one of the benefits of having such a wide device is that thermally none of the heat actually escapes out, like transfers out to that plastic on the side. You don't feel anything on that side. So if you put the device on your lap, yeah, you can feel that it's warm, but at the edges where you hold the device, no, it's as cool as possible. So that's really quick what that is. Worst case scenario, it's under 80 degrees Celsius and it doesn't get hot where you hold it. So A+. It's fine. And I think that's it. That wraps up my preview video for today. Hopefully you sat through all of it. Hopefully it flowed fine for you guys. I do have a 2-week span of time where I can be peppering in more data. I do actually have some more videos that I have planned, so stay tuned for that up to the 25th, which I'll have my review, and then a whole bunch of videos afterwards as well. There is still yet more cool features on the Steam Deck that you don't know about, and I hope I can tell you soon. So I leave you off with a tease yet again. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.